Randy Speck, the chair of the commission. I represent ANC 34G03, and that's the area that's roughly bounded by Utah and Nebraska and Broad Branch. And we're glad to have you here. This is our regular meeting, the second and fourth Mondays of each month. We haven't had a meeting though in about a month because we didn't meet at the beginning of June. So we'll begin by introducing the commissioners. Thank you, start.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Madak. I'm 34G04 at Lafayette Park and Lafayette School. I go from Utah, basically Utah, Tennyson, Broad Branch, and Nebraska.
Hi everyone, my name is Abraham Clayman. I represent 34G01, which is Hawthorne and Park Omnibus.
Hello, I'm Jerry Mallett. I represent 3G05, basically from Chevy Chase Circle down to Military and across to Broad Branch.
Hi, everybody. Dan Bradfield. I represent 3G06, which is the Chevy Chase Circle to the western portion of the district, over towards Chevy Chase Park.
All right, we have 5 commissioners here. That's a quorum. A quorum is 4, so we can conduct business tonight. The other 2 commissioners, just by the way, are out of town, so they're not available today. The first order of business is to adopt our agenda, and the agenda has been circulated on our website and on the Chevy Chase listserv and other places as well. Are there any modifications, changes? Okay, all those in favor of adopting the agenda? 5-0. Okay, thank you. We'll begin with commissioner announcements. And the first announcement I have this evening is with regard to the community center planning. And this is a project that we've been working on for a very long time. It's about 2 years, almost 2 years now. The council did approve our budget as the mayor had proposed it for FY 2019 on May 29th. That includes $19 million for the community center, and that's broken out into $3.5 million in 2019, $4.5 in 2020, and $11 million in 2021. And that schedule suggests that construction would begin probably sometime in 2020. The budget has not yet been transmitted from the council to the mayor, however, and so it is not final. Ultimately, it has to be signed by the mayor, and although there's some controversy about whether it has to be approved by the council because of the amendment that we had to the home rule bill and an initiative that gives DC budget autonomy, it probably will still go to the Congress, and there's some possibility the Congress could overturn it, although it's very unlikely. Suffice to say that the budget is not going to become final until probably at least the end of the summer. Once that has become final, and even before the money becomes available in October, we intend to sit down with the Department of Parks and Recreation, the Department of General Services, and start the process of planning and designing the fully modernized community center. Now that process is going to be guided by the report and the recommendations that the commission made in January. And that report, by the way, is available on our website if anybody wants to look at it. One of those key recommendations was that DPR and DGS must continue to work closely with the ANC, the community, and nearby neighbors to first, assure a suitable transition space for key programs, and second, develop more detailed plans for the community center to ensure that the final interior and exterior design meets the current and future community needs. Those were really important parts of our recommendation because this process doesn't end just with our making the recommendations and the budget being passed. There's a lot of work left to be done. And as in the past, the ANC will endeavor to involve all segments of the community in the planning process to address those 2 key issues, the transition and the planning for the actual design and implementation of the modernization. And we'll be pushing DPR and DGS to conduct all of their planning for the community center based on the residents' needs and expectations. On June 16th, members of the current events discussion group for the the seniors program at the community center. Some of them are here tonight. Wrote the ANC urging us to send a letter to DPR and DGS posing several questions about transition space during construction and about modernization plans. The transition plan is particularly important and vital for a number of community center programs, including fencing, dancing, and the seniors activities. And this topic will require extensive investigation to identify nearby suitable alternative venues. As we did in successfully pushing the mayor and the council to provide the funding, we intend to hold a series of special task force type meetings to address each of those issues and all of the questions and ramifications of construction. Those meetings will include DPR and DGS, as well as, of course, all of the community members. And we expect to hold the first meeting well before any funds are available in October, probably sometime in late summer or September, more likely September. We'll publicize the schedule for those meetings substantially in advance to ensure maximum participation. One thing that's important to keep in mind in all of this, though, is that there have been no firm decisions about the community center modernization. Even the $19 million budget could be subject to change if we decide that's either not enough or, I doubt seriously it'll be too much, but the $19 million is not even written in stone. We've jumped the first hurdle to getting a reasonable budget approved to begin this process. But the real challenges remain, and we'll work closely with residents to create a modern community center that truly serves all segments of the community. So we didn't want to put this on the agenda for tonight because we think it deserves a full-blown meeting. And so we will schedule that for either late in the summer, as I said, more likely in September when we can have all the commissioners back. For one thing, Chris Rombolini is going to be out for essentially the rest of the summer. And we'd like to have him involved because he's an architect and he's knowledgeable about a lot of these things. Okay, Jay, we're going to keep it very, very short. Okay.
You use the term, the word community a lot. I want to know how you address this community. What is the community in your mind? Because this is the only community center west of the park. And I do not believe that the other 5 ANCs have been reasonably involved in the development of the proposal, as well as how do you plan on involving them from here into the future? Because this place draws from all the ANCs here, and I can witness that as the early voting coordinator for this whole area.
Yeah, you brought that up before, Jay, and it's a very good point. I have reached out personally to every one of the chairs of the other ANCs. Throughout the process, when we were doing preparing our report, and when we were taking our survey, everything else, I always try to involve them. They've not stepped up to do it. And if you could encourage them to do so, that would be helpful. But we certainly appreciate their participation in the process. And I have just not been able, I've not seen any enthusiasm from their standpoint to participate. So we'll certainly reach out to them again. And we recognize that this community center serves a broader community than just Chevy Chase. Okay. Next announcement is a conference on the electric grid of the future. And I don't know whether you probably haven't been keeping up with this, but the Public Service Commission has been working for some time on what should the grid of the future look like? How do we get our electricity? How should it change over time? How can we make it a really modern system? And they're having a technical conference that's on this Thursday from 9:30 to 4:30. It's at the Public Service Commission hearing room, and it also will be live streamed. And there's a group called Smart Electric Power Alliance that is organizing this, and on their website you can watch the whole thing live streaming. next announcement is a really pretty important one because it's the election for ANCs for this next year, the next 2 years actually. ANC candidates run every 2 years, and we're on the November general election ballot. Anyone interested in serving as a commissioner may pick up petitions at the Board of Elections beginning on July 9th. And to be on the November 6th ballot, then you must be first a registered voter, second, have lived in the single-member district for at least 60 days, and third, submit a petition with signatures of 25 registered voters from your single-member district. Petitions must be returned no later than August 8th, so that's July 9th to August 8th. And more information is available at the Board of Elections website. Now, our ANC led an effort to try to get the Board of Elections to expand that petition period so that we could encourage more candidates to run for the ANC. All other candidates in the district for the general election have from June 15th until August 8th to complete their petitions. So an additional 3 weeks or so. And we asked the Board of Elections to do the same thing for ANCs. And the board declined to do that. It was disappointing to us that they did that, but they said there just hadn't been enough time in advance to let enough people know about the possible change. But they did say that they would consider it for the future. So we're hoping that that petition period would be longer in the future. It's important because people are away during the summer and it's very hard sometimes to get commissioners and their constituents together during that 1 month time period. So hopefully we can change that in the future. But it's very important for everyone who is interested in taking on this volunteer position to look into it at the Board of Elections and to get those petitions in if you wish to run. Finally, the Department of Energy and Environment has released its Sustainable DC 2.0 outline and is soliciting feedback on that. The goal of Sustainable DC is to make the district the healthiest, greenest, and most livable city in the United States. Pretty ambitious goal. And they're seeking feedback on the priorities that are identified in this outline and to ensure that it reflects the opinions of all the community and whether anything is missing from the outline. And all of that is available on the sustainable.future it's available at the Sustainable DC website, and you can participate in making comments on that at sustainable.future@dc.gov. Comment period closes on July 15th. Okay, any other announcements from the commissioners? Becky?
For those of you who are interested in the Lafayette Park Rec Center project, a notice came out that there's a meeting on the 27th. That's probably going to be changed because the notice wasn't given 2 weeks ahead of the meeting. The ANC requested that it be rescheduled. Talking to Jackie Stanley today, it's probably going to be the 11th or the 12th, so I would expect a new announcement to be posted on the listserv by tomorrow. So I just wanted to give you guys a heads up so you can put that on your calendar and don't not be surprised if this meeting on the 27th gets canceled right away. And also, that will not be the only meeting. The next meeting will be in the fall because we know people are on vacation, but they want to make sure that the project's going along the right lines which the community wants to direct it. So they can't wait any longer for another meeting. So that's all I want to say.
Good.
Nothing right now.
Good evening, welcome everybody. I'll start with a couple of easy things. On Reno Road, I think everybody knows that the repair and replace by DDOT has occurred or was to begin. It did begin. It has ended for all intents and purposes. There are a couple of pathways, walkways that they're going to be dealing with here in the near future. It sits, that district, my district, happens to sit exactly next to another district, and so we're going to have to work with the ANC next door in order to talk about kind of not traffic patterns, but slowing down traffic. What kind of mitigators we can put in on Reno Road. But other than that, the R&R has been completed. Morrison Avenue within our district was under R&R. Partial part of Morrison has been completed. Sidewalks and sidewalk repair has been completed. So all of that is very nice. There are still parts that some residents would like to take a look at, and so we're talking about that and we're seeing what we can do. Reno and Livingston. Everything's over towards the park. Reno and Livingston. The traffic light, which many of you have probably sat and waited for if you're on Livingston. DDOT has said for quite a long time that is timed effectively and efficiently to their belief. I continually have certainly members of my constituency that say, no, it's not, and they would like to take a look at it again. So I think we need to go to DDOT and try to have a conversation and see if we can do another study, or at least get an engineer out there to take a look at the timing and see kind of where we can, what the rationale is and if it really falls into it. Additionally, Chevy Chase Circle, as you know, the fountain's up and running. Fountain was having a little bit of flooding, but actually that has been repaired. NPS has been wonderful to work with this year. Friends of Chevy Chase Circle recently had a meeting with all 5 jurisdictions. I was there that oversee the circle to discuss both inside the circle as well as traffic patterns outside of the circle to make it a little more safe, or a lot more safe, potentially. DDOT and the Maryland State Highway Administration are having very detailed conversations. They both finished their engineering studies, which is taking about a year and a half. They have a couple of proposals that are currently being looked at. There will most likely be a pilot. Pilots are, I don't think people should get scared about pilots, but that being said, we'll discuss them, I think, in September, because it'll probably be the first 2 weeks of October. They'll last probably a week per pilot, maybe 1 to 2, upwards of maximum 3 different pilots. From what I have seen, I think there's one outcome that's come out of the study is probably what's going to work the best, but let's see what they come with, and we'll discuss that in September. And then lastly, sorry, this is really a potential new business item, and it's senior related. I have a constituent who, senior, fixed income, has 2 very large trees. She had urban forestry come out. Even though there were problems with the trees, not necessarily dying, so they would not designate them as such, thereby, in order to take them down, she has to pay the fee. Well, there are also roots coming through across her sidewalk. Safety issues are starting to pop their head as well. There is basically no solution. Urban forestry, it's kind of like it's out of our hands. For her to pay the permit fee would be around $9,900. This is for a senior with fixed income who's going to start, and a cane, is going to start having issues with their own sidewalk. There's a problem there. Yeah. And it seems like there's no fix. So I think it's something that maybe we want to, I don't know, have urban forestry or maybe a couple of entities we want to bring in and have a conversation about it. But I think that's something that I would like to take a look at. I'm trying as hard as I can, but I just feel like it's just wrong. Something, there should be some kind of exemption of some sort, I would think.
Because that doesn't include the cost of taking the tree down either.
Correct.
Which would be
Correct.
$9,000.
By the time you get there, she's probably, actually
safety team at all, or have you just been working solely with the work force?
You know, that's an interesting question. We should probably talk about that offline.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would help or if that would solve the problem, but it might be something, it might be a direction we want to talk about. So those are mine.
Jerry? Yes, Dan reminded me of one when he was talking about Morrison. So back in February, you had DDOT come out and take a look at the intersection at Military and Chevy Chase Parkway. It's a pretty dangerous intersection. There's been a lot of accidents there. There are blind spots and so on. And so that was 4 months ago. They got back to us and they have completed the initial stages of the study, including a site distance review, safety performance review, and data collection efforts. But they ran into a funding gap for their support services contract. They haven't been able to complete it. They now expect to have the support restored within the next month. So they're going to complete their study and they're going to have their community engagement team then get in touch with us to see how we're going to proceed.
It concerned me that there was a funding gap there. We asked why that gap occurred. Is it any, the mayor's office, can you give us any explanation as to why there would be a funding gap? Something as essential as studying a safety concern?
Like a funding gap for safety? I'm not sure. I can look that up as a why. I mean, not really things. I think sometimes they put that in the budget the year before, or something just for like safety investigations.
If it's a matter of not having the funding in this fiscal year, then they wouldn't have it until next fiscal year. But it looks like it's going to be closed within the next month.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jerry? You mentioned the intersection at Chevy Chase Parkway and Military Road. I know I raised that issue with a different ANC because the policemen there. There used to be a large convex mirror so that you could witness cars going eastbound. Otherwise, the visibility was very bad. But I repeatedly have difficulty getting across that intersection because cars regularly block that. Now, they did put a police officer there once in a car, and he kept his lights flashing. Well, then they don't do it. They don't block it. But if they put up either signage or start ticketing, it would...
These are all things that we discussed with them. We told them lots of these problems. We gave some proposed solutions. So we've been over all of these things.
Well, the mirror used to be there.
Right? We told them that. They know that. So hopefully when they finish their report and we start talking about potential solutions, we'll be able to get some more input from not just the affected neighbors, but from anybody that has an involvement with that intersection.
At a previous meeting with DDOT, they explained that those mirrors, which there used to be a number of them around the city, they took them all down, I think, because they said that they were having a hard time maintaining them so that the angle was correct. And as a result, if the angle wasn't correct, people would assume there was nothing coming in. In fact, there was. And so they considered it exacerbating the safety problem in some respects. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's what the explanation was given at our meeting.
It's sort of like taking all the stop signs down with the trees covering it. So.
Right.
Well, it really is a hazard there. I inch my way across if I'm lucky, or so far I'm lucky. But it seems to me that if there shouldn't be a light there, but if there were a warning light, you can do the electronics. So if cars on Chevy Chase Parkway.
These are all things that were discussed with them. Every one of these. And I'm sure we'll be getting into this more in the future.
Okay. Community announcements, let's go to the mayor's office.
I think I just saw anyone walking by.
Mike there.
It's working? Cool. All right. So my name is Russell. I'm on Ian Magnus' colleague in Ward 3. I just covered the southern part of the ward. I think I saw him running. He was with the mayor earlier, but he's on his way. I just wanted to provide updates from the mayor's office. And yeah, so if you haven't already, of course, we have a beautiful brand new library, the Cleveland Park Library. We're all very excited about it. So please head down Connecticut Avenue, Macomb, to check it out. Also this weekend, we broke ground at the Petworth Meditation Garden. That's going to be at 13th and Kansas Avenue. Described as a Zen park. It's a nice, peaceful green space. It has a hose there and some things for dogs, and it's a nice family place. So that's kind of my neighborhood. So please come by and see. Today, Mayor Bowser kicked off the Marion Berry Summer Youth Employment Program, and that's again for her pathways to the middle class. It's also a way to support violence prevention for a lot of our youth and provide them opportunities to figure out where they want to go with their careers. So we're very excited to have that. And again, recently Mayor Bowser expanded that to 23 to 24-year-olds. So now participate from ages 18 to 24. So we're concluding our June housing bloom. Last week we broke ground at Mount Vernon Triangle's Liberty Place Apartments in Ward 6, which will produce 21 new affordable apartments. And we also announced $1 million for new roofs for low-income families. This will be administered through the Department of Housing and Community Development, who also has a lot of other important programs that seniors can take advantage of. So there is the Office on Aging Safe at Home program, but there's also some other programs that seniors can take advantage of through our Department of Housing and Community Development. And so this program would essentially provide a quick and efficient way for lower income residents to purchase a secure roof. And we have more information on that as well. Coming up soon, we have DPW's 11th annual Truck Touch. You can find more information at dctrucktouch.eventbrite.com. If you're unfamiliar with the Truck Touch, it's where a bunch of different agencies bring out up to 40 different vehicles that are used in our city to clean our streets, to plow snow, to power wash things. So it's a great event for family and friends to come out. The kids get to learn about different buttons on things and they get to climb the vehicles. So if you'd like some more information on that, again, it'll be dctrucktouch.eventbrite.com. We would like for you to come out. Lastly, coming up is our Palisades Parade here in Ward 3, 4th of July parade. This year we'll also be having a ribbon cutting for the Palisades Recreation Center immediately after. So 10 a.m. we'll be lighting up at Whitehaven Parkway and Reservoir Road. And I say we because I know all of us will be there, right? All right. So that's all for today. And our guy's back here, so he'll take it away.
Thanks, Russell.
You are the liaison to the mayor.
Yes.
Of this board.
Yes.
Could you tell me why this board does not have a senior wellness center?
Yeah,
Despite the fact that
Jay.
that's the highest population.
Jay, we're not going to talk about that tonight.
Well, you don't want to talk about it, why don't you more than that?
Well, we'll have to do it at another time.
And he came here to talk about what the mayor is doing in a truck fest.
And just real quick, I mean, there's a lot
Truck
of
fest sounds great for kids.
It does. There's a bunch of exciting things that we're going to talk about, and I'm happy to talk about you after the meeting about a lot of great happening things in Ward 3 for seniors. Like a lot of great things happening in Guy Mason, a lot of exciting things that are coming in services. Well, there's a lot of good things going on, so thank you for your commitment for seniors, and we appreciate it. So nice to meet everybody today. Thank you.
Anthony?
The announcement about the parades is sort of rough. So I only have 2, maybe 1.5 minutes. Regarding council business, this Friday, the Committee on Transportation and the Environment, is this call?
Yes.
Is it on?
Okay. The
Committee on Transportation and the Environment, along with the Committee on Education, are having a public roundtable on school modernizations. Board 3 is fortunate enough that over the past 10 years, all of our schools have been modernized with the exception of Eaton, which is on track for next year to begin. All are welcome to come to the public roundtable. It will be at the Wilson Building in room 412 at 11 a.m. So feel free to contact our office at 202-724-8062 to sign up and testify. Or if you'd like to submit written testimony because you can't be there in person, feel free to call that number for some information or email Miss Akima Benjamin at her email address, first initial A, last name Benjamin at dccouncil.us to sign up to testify. Last I heard, surprisingly, the witnesses only had 2 people on it. So sign up to testify. Sure. This Friday, June 29th. And, come to the July 4th parade. Councilmember Che will be there throwing out fruit snacks and constitutions like we are every year. Enjoy hot dogs, watermelon, and lemonade at the end, and the ribbon cutting at the Palisades Rec Center.
Thank you. Any other announcements from the community? Yes, Robert.
This is for the Chevy Chase Citizens Association. We're having our summer ice cream social on July 12th. That's Thursday evening, 6:30 to about 8:30. Come out, free ice cream for you kids.
Where's it going to
What's
be?
that?
All ages.
Robert,
All ages.
Robert, where's it going to be? Where's it going to be?
It's going to be right up here by the library,
Okay.
between the library and the center.
Okay. All right. Okay, then we'll begin with the other items on our agenda. The first substantive item is the reprise on the Little Beast Bistro, which we considered a number of times before. Dan, you want to introduce that?
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. Oh, go ahead. Come on up. As I think for several meetings now, we've been dealing with varying regulatory requirements for the restaurant Little Beast. For Little Beast, there were a couple of technical changes that needed to be made. A couple substantial things, but a couple mostly technical items. At the last meeting, we voted to approve it based upon the changes being made. There's 1 or 2 additional things. These documents have been submitted.
Yes.
They're now under consideration with the Open Space Committee, and I'll let Aaron, the proprietor of Little Beast, to be, give us a rundown.
Little Beast Dad. I'm Aaron Gordon. Thanks for having us. Again. We came to talk about 2 primary things where we're going to put our trash, because that's been one of the main subject. If you look at the last page, we just did what I think was the best drawing, is using the Google Maps to show you exactly where our trash would go. And we're showing 2 3x4 trash containers with daily pickup by Tenleytown Trash, 7 days a week. One of those will be for trash, and one of those will be for recycling. That's a space that's currently being used. It's in the back alley. It's actually on private property, just adjacent to the alley. Does anyone have any questions about that first before we move on? The second issue is really just designing, showing the design plans for the deck on the McKinley side. I think everything has been approved on the Connecticut Avenue side. So I think probably the third page is the easiest to sort of see and understand. Several things were asked when we went to the public space meeting last month. The first and foremost is, do we need a deck? Because as we were made aware of, public space is for everyone. We want to make sure you actually need a deck. That property there is on a pretty steep slant. It's approximately 1 inch per foot. So our deck goes down a little over 12 feet, 13 feet. So it goes down approximately 13 inches. Anything over 1/2 inch, my understanding, anything over 1/2 inch per foot actually allows or requires that you create some sort of a platform. So we're actually double that requirement. The other things to take note of on the drawings here that I think are most important is, without asking for an exception, the public space would like your deck to be only 18 inches high. That's exactly how we've drawn it. The deck will be 18 inches at the most, from farthest point away from the space. So it's not a very high deck, it's more of a platform, really. The second thing I think is the most important is that we're creating 8-foot posts that will hold, rather than umbrellas, will hold what is called a shade sail. Basically, it's a stretch canopy. Frankly, I like them because they create a lot more shade with kind of less clutter. Another thing that I think is really important is we've created a, that seems a little bit too loud, I don't know. Anyway, we've created a ADA ramp from our current ADA ramp onto our platform and then down onto the deck. We have a really accessible, nice ADA ramp right onto our deck. That only goes down about 5 inches, so it's about 5 feet, which is required. Those are the primary things. We have an entryway on the front. I don't know if that's me. We have an entryway on the front. The front and the back for safety. Anything else?
Question?
I had a couple of questions, I think. One thing that the Public Space Committee emphasized was that the railing can't be more than 3 feet high, measured from the sidewalk. And I assume from the drawings that that's what you've done.
That's exactly right. You see that, I should have mentioned that, the platform itself is 1.5 feet, and the fence that we're showing is another 1.5 feet. So we're at 3 feet exactly.
And another thing that came up at the Public Space Committee, and just for the record, we ought to make it clear, they also asked a number of questions about the lighting outdoors, and as I understand it, you essentially removed the lighting outdoors.
Yeah, so public space also made it clear that it's sort of a temporary deck. Anything on public space ought to be temporary, and it seemed like the lighting and the electrical that went to it made that not quite as temporary, and so we just deleted that portion.
So there won't be any lighting in the outdoor cafe?
Correct. Perhaps we'll use Christmas lights, like a lot of people, but I don't think any permanent lighting.
Good.
Of course, we would come back before you, or before if we, wanted to actually seek that out.
Yeah, I noticed today when I was walking here, there are DDOT signs on the corner of Safeway for no parking tomorrow from 9 to 5. Is tomorrow the day they're supposed to move the bike rack? Yes?
Probably our biggest challenge has been getting the bike rack replaced across the street. Yes, the answer is they promised to move it tomorrow.
some obstacle from that easternmost door, westernmost door, just in the way of the doorway. Is that a table that you're planning on putting in? Because that would make it difficult for a wheelchair user to access the accessible bathroom. And then the designs that I see, you're raising it 18 inches, and yes, you have a ramp, but there's this danger of being 18 inches off the ground here without any barrier to stop somebody in a wheelchair or a walker from falling over.
That's a good point. It goes for wheelchair and walker and children as well.
Yes, ADA is a major issue, especially in an area that has the highest density of seniors in the city and the city.
Those are good questions. So right now, the only entryway is the primary entryway for a couple reasons. The side door, the westernmost side door you spoke of, is actually at about 14 inches or so. It's two very large, actually almost 3 very large steps for us to have access back there as well, to have a second ADA access. Would require an awfully steep ramp. Essentially, it would require about 15, 16 feet of ramp, so that would be very difficult. But just having the one entryway, and the fact that it's the main entryway, I think it's pretty good. And we will also have access for non-wheelchair access in the back as well, so it's a little bit quicker to get to the bathroom. As far as the other question goes, right now, because the slope is like this, we'll have our entry and exit way. It's actually not necessarily an entry and exit way.
That's the western entrance.
Right, so it's very close. Both of them are very close to the least of that slope. So we don't expect to actually need a stair at that space. In other words, it'll be 12 to 13 inches in height. Sorry, 16 inches in height at the far end. But at the near end,
is that rear entry on grade?
which entry? The doorway or
The western doorway. I presume your corner doorway is the main doorway.
Yes, on the corners of
So
it.
the one in the back, on the western end,
Yeah.
is the one that's closest to the accessible bathroom interior. So is that, so patrons, and you have 3 wheelchair, at least in the example here,
Yep.
wheelchairs on that patio.
Again, the major issue is back with that doors.
Enter from that western doorway.
That door is so high that you have to do a ramp. It's about 15 inches high, so you
And
have.
it isn't an accessible, you're not providing accessibility to people with disabilities.
That's okay.
Excuse me, if you have a disability and you cannot get to the.
I think we've done a great job of providing accessibility for, we have accessibility straight into the main door, and then again to the deck, and back up to the main door. No, you can't get to that back door, but that's not the fault of our own. We would have to rebuild a property that's not ours to actually get it done.
It doesn't meet ADA standards.
It does mean.
It doesn't.
Yeah, I thought I made it clear. It meets ADA standards in every way, shape, and form.
And Jay,
It's just not
also,
2 entryways. It's just one.
there's a review that's conducted by the Public Space Committee for ADA compliance as well. And so they've cleared it. So I think it does meet ADA requirements. Yeah, we're not experts in that.
It absolutely does.
I don't know if you have this drawing, but here's the ADA access right here. It's very clear.
That's ADA access from this patio, which is raised 18 inches.
That's right.
Now, how do you get up to the 18 inches? Through the back.
So here's the main doorway with the steps. There's ADA on this side. You go up the ADA on this side. That's right.
There's
existing ADA on this side. That's a great question. We're not showing the existing ADA, so it actually makes a ton of sense. Maybe I should have been more clear. There's an ADA ramp on this side that's existing. It's been existing for many years. We're leaving that there. So you come up here and then go down to our deck. So I thought I made it clear verbally, but I see on the pictures it's not as clear. So it's a big question. It is absolutely ADA accessible, whether you're coming from the street or the deck. If that's not clear, we can talk about that first.
Fortunately, I don't use an assistive device. When I do, I don't want to oversight.
Okay, Jay had one other question. I can't remember what it was now. Is there a second question, Jay? Didn't. We'll move on. Deanne, did you have a question?
I just wanted to say I have worked with Robert Gordon on the Chevy Citizens Association, and while we didn't always get along on things, I will say that because it makes me completely unbiased. I have no doubt he and his son are the business people that we want in this neighborhood, and that if something needs to be ADA compliant, they already have it that way, or will ensure that it is, because I have never seen him not do what he believes is the right thing.
I am not questioning his desire.
Let's not get bogged down in this language.
It's just that what I see in the drawings is somewhat disturbing.
Okay.
I'm sure it would be a great, deviation.
All right. Any other questions from commissioners?
Yeah, I make the motion that we accept the changes or amended changes.
No objection.
Yeah. Sorry, let me do it right. I make a motion that we have no objection to the changes that have been submitted to the Open Space Committee under consideration.
I second.
All those in favor? 5-0. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And let's hope this is the last time we have to do this before we open.
Thank you very much for all your help. Assistance, thank you.
Okay. Dan,
Yes.
you have the next item on the agenda.
Yes, one close to my heart. Allen Seeber, constituent of mine, and a long-standing community leader, has always had a concern, as I have, we've always shared this, a very strong concern about parking, not only currently, but almost more importantly, parking in 5, 15, and 20 years from now. Because as the density increases, as the neighborhood begins to shift and change, as the entire city will, so will the parking. And we're already at a point where parking, if you go, I call it 3 blocks out from Connecticut, is already an issue. And Alan asked, he has some ideas, he'd like to start discussing this in a more serious way. I think we all very much strongly agree. And Alan, if you
The manifest vitality of our community draws both businesses and prospective homeowners into Chevy Chase. Yet constant discussion of parking problems here may imply we've got too much of a good thing. We must treat any such parking crisis as an opportunity for improvement of our community. Tonight we meet with the ANC on the Chevy Chase High Street, Connecticut Avenue between Livingston and the Circle. Amid a dozen restaurants, various retail stores, banks, offices, supermarket, movie theater, library, all sorts of amenities along this strip. At every proposed enhancement of our community assets, as we examine tonight, we address the inconvenience imposed upon residents nearest the commercial strip, primarily loss of residential parking spaces to commercial patronage. With each such discussion, we draw nearer to a tipping point where some cost would supersede any benefit any entrepreneur might propose to our ANC for public permits or recommendation for new business. This is a form of community sclerosis. Clearly, we should not follow Cleveland Park's failure to to tend to its high street on Connecticut from Porter to Macomb. Even with a metro stop at its center, a fractious community watches one new business after another shudder due largely to parking problems without intervening. Nor do I recommend the result. Political power joined with development resources to install Cathedral Commons on Cleveland Park's Wisconsin Avenue border over community objection, further dooming its Connecticut Avenue businesses. It's therefore a mixed blessing that Giant built a modern supermarket at Cathedral Commons, not on Connecticut Avenue. Anchor stores solve parking issues for adjacent stores. Giant was another store at Wisconsin Circle, Whole Foods built at Friendship Heights, high-end Safeways are elsewhere in D.C. or Bethesda, but not Chevy Chase. Approximately 10,000 of the most affluent households in these United States live in Chevy Chase, D.C. or Maryland. The majority of them drive right past our Safeway to reach competing stores. What I envision in our Safeway is the latest supermarket design with all its divisions and kiosks. I see it spread above a spacious parking garage that would allow paid parking for all patrons of our high street in addition to Safeway customers. I see the parking gates lifted from 9 p.m. to midnight to encourage patronage of our restaurants, and on weekends to buttress business along our commercial strip, as is the habit in Bethesda. I see residents' cars more easily parked in front of their homes. Tim McNamara, Safeway's senior Eastern Region real estate manager, told me last week, Safeway, quote, would welcome the opportunity to build and operate a new/larger store at this location, unquote, but that theirs is a leasehold until 2033 with various limitations. But that statement is not dispositive. We can't implement such resolution of parking problems in Chevy Chase on our own. We can be creative, we can build consensus, we can marshal resources abundant in our community, we can advocate. The act of searching for solutions helps make them apparent to the prepared mind. Now, why isn't Tim McNamara's statement not dispositive? They and the Safeway and the landlord have just finished a lease agreement and let blood over that. And now over the next decade or so, they have, by mutual consent, agreed to heal. In the meantime, we could, in fact, sit down with them as a community because they have their deal. What we're thinking about could be a codicil to their deal. It could be anything. Grocery is a margin business to a slight degree. It is a volume business in the main. If Safeway has a store that will generate a substantially greater margin, there's no reason in the world why the landlord can't have a taste of that. There's no reason why, rather than being the formidable opponents by reputation as well as in act, that we could be, in fact, advocates. We could help put together something that would work with the landowner and Safeway, in the course of which we would be able to generate parking spaces for the rest of our businesses. I see that as something worthwhile. My concern would be that someday a Holland and Knight lawyer comes to this podium to let us all know that someone has got an option on that property, and the money and the muscle and the political machine have decided to bless us with a 90-foot mixed-use building on that property. Then we'll pay attention to this, but it will be a different outcome.
Thanks, Alan. Let me ask a couple of questions. There's also there are zoning issues that would have to be addressed too, because right now there is a special exception for that parking lot at Safeway. It's zoned residential, actually. And it's got no limit on that special exception, however, unlike all the other parking lots in this neighborhood that have a term limit on the special exception. That one does not. There are some conditions that go along with it as well. All of that would have to be done through, presumably, the BZA or if it was a PUD through the zoning commission. So that's one other hurdle that would have to be overcome.
No doubt, but every time the city comes up with an issue and it comes up here, we find people who know more about it than the people who sent us the issue. There are plenty of people in this town.
Yeah.
I know them, some,
Yeah.
who could easily sit down and get a respectful listen from Holland and Knight. I mean, I think, sure, there are problems, but with the resources available to this community and the dedication to solving the problem, I don't see the limits that perhaps the rules seem to impose.
There are other potential places where we could have parking too. One is just right behind me here at Wells Fargo. Might we think about that as well as a parking resource for the future? Because that place is not being used to its fullest efficiency right now. The other thing I thought about is 5333 Connecticut. I know they've got a lot of parking spaces in that building that I bet are not being purchased by the residents there. And if there were a way to use those empty parking spaces, that might be helpful as well.
Well, that's an interesting idea. I mean, my point in this is we assembled some thinking, some people to look at this. I believe we can, in fact, come up with some sensible solution.
Do you have a suggestion for how the ANC should go about organizing that?
I think Dan Bradfield and I would love to spend a little time thinking about
Okay. Well,
Jerry as well.
one thing that we've done in the past, as you know, because you were involved in it, is we've had task forces. We had a task force on zoning rewrite. And so it might be productive to do something like that again on parking.
Indeed, that was in the back of my mind the entire time.
Jerry? And I agree with you. I was thinking Wells Fargo as well. But there are other issues in regard to parking, and we really have to look at it in a holistic manner, not just Safeway or Wells Fargo. I know when you mentioned 5333 Connecticut Avenue, maybe they wouldn't have so many empty spaces if residents actually had to buy spaces in there instead of getting permits, which they weren't supposed to be getting in the first place, and hopefully they won't have them too much longer. I know there's also been discussion on certain blocks, at least in my district, about looking at the petition process to get the hours changed for the permits. You only need, I think it is, half of the residents on any given block to be signees to a petition to at least present it to DC to talk about that. And a question that I got clarified from Ian actually this week about reciprocity parking permits, because I've noticed a lot of out-of-state plates have permits, and now I know they're allowed to have them because of reciprocity, but those permits are supposed to have an R on it for reciprocity. But I've noticed some out-of-state plates that have a permit that don't have an R on it. So there are a lot of different things that we can start looking at, and I think the idea about putting together a task force or whatever is an excellent one, that we could look at this in a holistic manner.
Thank you. Just two quick questions. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for really thinking about this and clearly spending some time writing something to be here. So I just want to say that I really appreciate could just very briefly, was there something you noticed or a specific event, or is it sort of just kind of over the course of the last few years that you said this has caused you to think that this is a real issue that requires some attention?
Well, I think it's over the decades. And I live on 39th Street, near military, very close to military. So I have seen the congestion develop. It's residents, and of course this is a problem in many places, not just here. But it is difficult for the residents, but when you consider how vibrant this area is, it's more vibrant than it was over time. And there is a point that you reach where you just can't get any more. You know, the juice just doesn't flow that way. And what happens? It falls. And I'm concerned. I think we can get, if we can bring some attention to this and some serious thought. I think we'll find these guys can make money at this. You know, Safeway and the landlord can make more money. There is an incentive in this for them. And we may come up with some other things as well. There are incentives. And in the end, if we can get some insurance against that day when, because the density is coming, it's flowing uphill, it's coming here. So if we can protect another couple of generations, that would be a good thing.
Okay. I know nothing about this issue, but I'm just curious, does this city is there any public parking authority in the city? And given the amount of money I pay in parking fines, having parked in Bethesda in that huge parking lot down there, God, it seems like it would be a moneymaker. Does the city have a parking authority?
Not that I'm aware of. That's an interesting question.
And if so, why not?
I don't think that, it's all private parking in the city, isn't that right, Ian?
We don't have public parking.
Except on the streets.
The last difficult situation was in Adams Morgan, I believe, years and years ago, down near their community center. There is a parking garage off 18th Street there. That's somewhat unique. You know, in this instance, we do have a parking garage, of course. Sorry, Cathedral Commons has a parking garage akin to the mechanism that Bethesda follows. And you know, they're using it. It makes money. So it will amortize the cost of building a garage in some way. But they also tune it so that the surrounding businesses, the restaurants in particular, if they lift the gates, and you go there to eat at 7:30 and they lift the gates at 9, well, you can stay there and keep eating. It's an incentive to eat at the restaurants.
Okay, thank you, Alan. We're going to look at this, and it is an important issue for the community. Okay, the next issue is a discussion of the proposed Omnibus Assisted Living Residence Improvement and Quality Long-Term Care Act that was being considered by the council. This was a bill that was actually introduced last February and had the signatures of all 13 council members who were sponsoring, co-sponsoring. However, it was brought to my attention, and I brought it in turn to the Commission's attention, that our constituents at Ingleside and Knollwood particularly, Knollwood representatives here tonight, were very concerned about this bill because it had a number of significant flaws that would make it more difficult for assisted living residences to operate. It would take away a lot of the choice that residents had, and it would perhaps doom the development of other assisted living residences is in the city. So the council held hearings last Friday on this, and as we originally understood it, I thought it was going to go quickly through the council and that we needed to act quickly as a result if we were going to support our constituents at Ingleside, Knollwood, and the other assisted living facilities in our neighborhood. But it looks like it's not going to move that quickly at all now. The chair, Vince Gray, said that he was going to essentially slow the process down. He was going to take comments on the bill throughout the summer. He'd leave the record open throughout the summer, and they won't take it up until October again. And there were 50 witnesses that testified on Friday. It was, I thought, a pretty remarkable morning and afternoon. There were a few people who were upset with one particular assisted living facility. It's run by Sibley Hospital. And apparently some individuals there had problems. But I thought it was interesting that one of the other witnesses said we shouldn't be developing regulations and legislation based on anecdotes, but we should use research. And that's what was represented by most of the other witnesses who came with some statistics. One that was particularly striking, I thought, was that compared with Maryland and Virginia, DC has an appallingly low number of assisted living residences. Half as many per person over 65 in the district as in Maryland or Virginia. And as Jay has pointed out, this is an area that has a lot of seniors, and they're all getting older, and we're going to need facilities like these to be able to accommodate seniors as they age. And the importance of assisted living is that it enables seniors to graduate from one level of care to another, depending on their needs. And rather than a one-size-fits-all, this is what we will dictate exactly how assisted living will operate, it gives the assisted living operator and the residents an opportunity to tailor the care to their particular needs. And that is an extraordinarily important factor. There were a number of things that came out in the testimony. First of all, I should just say that the testimony was, in my view, inspiring. It was very, very interesting to hear social workers, for instance, at the, what's the assisted living facility that's just on Military Road, just before you, on the one that's near Friendship Heights. I've forgotten the name of it now, but there was a social worker from there who was just eloquent in her description of how it becomes a real family where the staff and the residents live together, work together, and they're all working toward the same objective. And there were parents who come in and talk about how their loved ones had been cared for so well as they aged and needed more care. One of the major concerns about the bill is that it would prohibit, for instance, anyone with moderate to severe dementia to go to an assisted living facility. Well, as I've learned from the people in Ingleside and Knollwood, and from lots of the other testimony, a lot of the people who are at assisted living facilities have some form of dementia. And it's very hard, there are no standards for exactly what constitutes moderate to severe. And so you would be excluding a group of people who could thrive in assisted living, but the bill would prohibit them from being admitted to assisted living. Other directives in the bill, for instance, would require a nurse on site 24 hours a day. Well, the assisted living facilities all have nurses on call 24 hours a day, but they don't have someone on site because it's typically not needed. And if you do that, it has some unintended consequences that are pretty severe. The most important of which, it seems to me, is you will change the categorization of an assisted living facility from housing to an institution for purposes of looking at low-income tax credits. And when you do that, that means that affordable assisted living facilities, which are being planned right now in Wards 7 and 8, would not be eligible for low-income tax credits and therefore would not be economically viable. And there were developers who came and said, we're ready to build in these areas that are now assisted living deserts, they said, because there's no assisted living facilities in Ward 7 and Ward 8. We're ready to build there, but if you continue to consider this bill, we will not go forward because we can't do it economically because of that staffing changes you made. There are lots of other things about the bill that would increase the costs and reduce the residents' choice. And those seem to me to be particularly damning for the bill. And I was very heartened by the fact that both Councilmember Che and Councilmember Todd, in their opening statements, despite the fact that they were co-sponsors of the bill, both of them said they would oppose it, and oppose it strongly. And because they had looked at it more carefully and they realized that it had severe problems. And I think by the end of the day, Councilmember Gray had also come around to the position that there were severe problems with the bill as it was written, and that he was not going to push that bill. He did say that it was important to raise these issues, and I agree with that. The big problem has been that the Department of Health has not issued regulations in the 18 years since the passage of the Assisted Living Residences Act in 2000. And that's obviously a problem. There are regulations now that are in draft form, have been collaboratively prepared by a wide range of people. They are infinitely better than the statute that was being proposed at the council. And so I'm hopeful that that's going to go forward. But I wanted to report to everyone that this is an important issue for our community, particularly because we've got not only Ingleside and Knollwood, but we have Forest Side, which is a memory care unit for Forest Hills. Oh, we have Sunrise, which is right down on Connecticut Avenue, and there's another one, Chevy Chase House, which is also an assisted living facility just a few blocks down. And we've got a lot of those facilities right here in our neighborhood, and we need to make sure that they stay vibrant and serving their communities. And we need to encourage the council to look more carefully at this so that they don't go down the wrong path. So what I'm going to propose, with the commission's support, I hope, is to look at filing some testimony later in the summer, probably in July, when we've had a chance to look at it more carefully. And then try to think about, in light of what the testimony was at the hearing, how can we help the council to address this issue in the most productive way. And we'll work with Knollwood and Ingleside to make sure that what we're suggesting is consistent with their needs and expectations. And I should emphasize that this was not, the testimony that was given was not by Knollwood and Ingleside management, it was by residents at Knollwood and Ingleside. And they were very articulate and very persuasive. So this was sort of under the radar, and nobody was focusing. There have been a couple of articles in the Washington Post about it in the last week, but it's a more important issue, I think, than we expected, and certainly it's an important issue for our community. So, commissioners, I'd be interested in what your thoughts are.
I just have a couple of questions for clarification. Maybe somebody in the audience could answer, because I was confused as I was reading stories and testimony, and it talked about 11, that there were 11 facilities that people referenced. And Knollwood wasn't even one of the 11 because they're not listed in the licensed list that DC publishes. And, well, Chevy Chase House wasn't on that list. I don't think Sunrise is on that list.
9 of them are in Northwest DC.
Pardon?
There are 12, and 9 of them are in Northwest DC.
Right, but some of them that weren't on that list.
Depends on what list you're looking at.
There's a list that DC publishes of licensed establishments. And for instance, Sunrise wasn't on that list. Chevy Chase House isn't on that list. So I'm just wondering what puts somebody on that list and what doesn't put somebody on that list.
I can answer that question for you. I think, do I need to take the microphone or my mom?
You're good.
Well, I'd like to take the microphone. Okay, then it's on our video.
My name is Patricia Jones. I'm the president of the Residents Council at Knollwood Military Retirement Community. But I'm also a retired professional in the management of long-term care facilities and hospitals and geriatric care centers and assisted living. I've worked as a consultant for the state of Arizona in these kinds of issues over the years and been on the Governor's Advisory Council there. There are many of us in both Knollwood and Ingleside, because we know Ingleside well, that are retired professionals in the community. So although we spoke as residents, we come from a background of looking at these kinds of regulations and going, oh my goodness, what have they done? In 2000, and I'll make this very brief, but in 2000, it was decided that there needed to be some sort of regulation and licensure of assisted living facilities in the district. So this bill was written in 2000. It was finally implemented in about 2005 to 2007. When I first moved here from out of state, and from a state where assisted living is very highly regulated, and my husband needed assisted living, I wanted to look into those regulations because I'd been responsible for implementing them at some point in my life. And I was appalled to find that there aren't any. The regulations that were developed in 2000 are how you become licensed, and not much beyond that. There are no regulations for what you can and cannot do once you become licensed. Not none, but very little regulation. So the issue that was raised by all of this is a good one, and that is that we need regulation, most definitely. It's time to do that. The problem is that this amendment to the regulation, and that's what the bill is, it's not a whole new bill, it's an amendment to a bill, doesn't answer the questions in a way that it is at all possible for assisted living facilities to survive, or for people to get the kind of quality of end-of-life care that they need, or to be in the least restrictive environment where they need to be to have a quality of life. Assisted living is the next thing from being in your own home. It's the next step. It means that you can no longer live alone, but you need help. There are nurses on site on all assisted living facilities, but they're not necessarily registered nurses. There is no requirement for them to be registered nurses. They can be licensed practical nurses, and in those states that require registered nurse intervention, there'll be a contract for someone to come in as a consultant every 30 days and review plans of care and that kind of thing. And the Department of Health does the inspections and makes sure that you live up to all the regulations. But what they've done with this, because it was a reactive thing from some people who were very unhappy with what was happening in assisted living in one particular facility, what happened then was that a group of people got together, and we don't know all the particulars, but formed some sort of a group that submitted this bill and caught us all by surprise. We wouldn't have known about it if one of our residents' daughters hadn't seen it come across her desk. And her mother happens to be someone with early onset Alzheimer's who is in independent living at the present time, but will need assisted living at some point. Now in our building, you just go downstairs to another part of the building, which is our assisted living facility, and we have about 40 beds, 40 rooms down there, apartments in that part of the building, and that's assisted living. So she wouldn't have to leave her husband, she wouldn't have to leave her home, she'd just be down the hall, as my husband was when he was there. But the way this is structured makes so little sense that what I collected when I read through it, and it's 73 pages long, I collected the 7 most egregious issues that I found in this. So I want to very briefly just hit the highlights. That requirement of the 24/7 registered nurse on site at all times is a higher requirement than any skilled nursing facility or memory care unit or nursing home has anywhere. It's not realistic at all. It's also not enforceable, because then assisted living will become something that no one can afford. And it's already expensive enough to need any kind of long-term care. But you've got to keep it affordable. You can't over-regulate with things that are not needed and still have an affordable program. So that's the first one that hits us. Plus, it means that we then move from being a social model, which is what assisted living is. It's a social model with medical support, to a medical model with social support. And that moves us from a residential status to an institutional status. And it means that no developer will touch us, because the only way they can is if they realize the benefits. New developers that come in, and there are 4 ready to do that. They can't come in because they cannot then, if they're building a medical institution, reap the benefits of those tax cuts and those Medicare waivers. And 4 different businesses testified that they would pull out if this bill went through the way it is. The denial of admission for people with moderate dementia is absolutely ridiculous, but one that's even worse to me, because I spent a lot of years in hospice nursing, is that anyone who has ever needed hospice or has been diagnosed as needing hospice cannot be admitted to assisted living. The whole idea of hospice is quality of life and delivered in the least restricted environment, the most home-like environment, so that journey you're on at the end of your life is a good journey instead of an institutional journey. Those people, if they're not admitted into assisted living, are going to have to go into a nursing home. And that's a completely opposite approach to what hospice wants to accomplish. It also says, and this one is absolutely ridiculous, no one can send anyone to an emergency room. The nurse cannot call the ambulance if someone has an accident and have them taken to the hospital. She cannot do that unless it is a critical, imminently life-threatening emergency. So that means heart attack, breathing crisis, massive bleeding. Only those things can go to the hospital. Otherwise, the only alternative is you lay there in the bed with a broken hip until your family can figure out what to do about it. There are things in it that just mean nobody who knew anything about health care had anything to do with writing these things. We can have no commercial enterprises on anymore, which means we can't have a beauty shop for our residents. We can't have a rehab facility. We can't have contract physical therapists come in. We can't have any commercial enterprises involved with any assisted living. We can't have our medical director be the attending physician for people who live in assisted living. That means that they have to call someone else to be their physician who may not ever want to come there. And most people choose the attending physician to be the medical director because he is there and he knows the residents and he knows elder care and he knows long-term care. It also says that anyone with dementia has to be obviously and publicly identified as having dementia. That is completely against the Health Information Privacy Act, and that discriminates against people with dementia. The last thing people want to know, particularly in the earlier stages, is that somebody has dementia. The last thing somebody with dementia wants anyone to know is that they have dementia. And then there's a requirement that people have to be allowed to use their own pharmacies. That's not possible in assisted living. You don't have a safe medication administration system if the nurse is having to pull medicine out of 40 shoe boxes for 40 different people. You have to use a contract pharmacy that comes in and has a system that you can safely deliver and document. People can use their own pharmacies if they're deemed able to give themselves their own meds and keep them in their rooms, and that's as it should be. Those are just a few of the highlights. Our concern at this point is nothing is going to happen until October, but we don't want to get complacent between now and October. So we will be doing email blitzes, we will be getting a hold of people as often as we need to and speaking wherever we need to keep enough pressure on the council that that some of us who know what it's all about help rewrite this legislation, and that they really do due diligence when they put it together so that we can continue to have good assisted living facilities in Washington with good oversight, but not so much oversight that it kills what we're all about. Any questions?
That was a fantastic overview, thank you. But I still have my original question.
And I'm sorry, I can't really answer it because I'm not sure what it is. I haven't seen what it is you're looking at.
There are a lot of facilities that are licensed and a lot of facilities that aren't licensed that provide assisted living. If you go and look in many directories, you'll see 30 or 40 listed for DC, but only 12 of them are licensed.
Right.
So is something going to be done about having all of them licensed, or should they all be licensed? Is it like an electrician, get a licensed electrician, get somebody else that's not licensed, but that can still do the job just as well? So that's what I was confused about.
And that will depend on how this bill is written, but you're absolutely right. You have to be licensed and have some oversight. The difficulty that we have in assisted living, and it's been dealt with in many other states, the difficulty we have is that Medicare never covers anything in assisted living, so it means no federal money is going into it. Once federal money goes into it, then Medicare standards go in and federal standards go in and states have to follow them. We're in a unique position in assisted living. One of the states I worked in was Arizona. Assisted living in Arizona has 5 different levels of licensure for assisted living. You can have all 5 levels in your facility or any one level, but the smallest level is a group home, and you don't have to have a nurse on staff. People can be trained, and they have to be licensed and trained to administer medication and just take care of people in an extra bedroom. So it's got to be written into it, and I appreciate that comment because it definitely has to be there.
I think you're discussing facilities, and there's a range of facilities, but there's a broad spectrum. I don't hear anyone speaking to, nor do I see much in this area of something referred to as NORC, naturally occurring retirement communities, in which people can remain in their own house. As I said, it's a spectrum. Some people cannot, but in which concierge services can come into the house. How, ramps can be placed in, stair movers can be put in place so people can still feel comfortable with in their own houses at a lesser cost to them than the cost of a facility.
Isn't that what Northwest Neighbors Village is doing? That's my understanding, that that's what they're focusing on.
Yes, but there are other cities, for example, New York City has a city activity norms throughout. And also, in a sense, to address what one of the former speakers was concerned about, is parking in more densely populated areas, more dense. New York City implemented something for seniors and the elderly in 2008. They mandated that half-fare taxi cabs be accessible. And the success rate right now is that the taxi cabs show up, accessible taxi cabs, within 13 minutes. So that people are not limited to going to medical appointments or something like that with a 24-hour prior call, but they can get to the theater or seeing friends and so forth, which makes the life experience much more beneficial.
But Jay, we can deal with that at another time, but this is really focused on this legislation, which
Well, yes.
we're worried about
But
now.
I'm saying there's something
I understand.
beyond you're looking at only one portion of the spectrum.
That's what the legislation is looking at. And first of all, we have to address the legislation. Yes, sir.
Lenny Shamrock, Litigation Street. So I'm appalled at the notion that there have been no regulations since either 2000 or 2005. That's absurd. And I would think that if nothing else is in this bill, there should be a deadline for issuing regulations. 2 years or something. If you leave it open-ended, they'll just suppress it for another 15 years.
There is a draft regulation that's been circulated, and it's really quite good.
I'm not talking about the draft, I'm talking about
It's expected to be issued, published, and then be on the fast track. It's an emergency legislation, but that's supposed to come out anytime. I understand. But
this legislation should include a deadline for regulation that has to be ordered by the
hopefully the regulations will be in place long before the legislation.
Hopefully.
Yes.
That was something that Vincent Gray raised, to his credit, was that we need to do something quickly while everything else falls into place. Some regulation without legislation, perhaps, just to get going, and we need to do that pretty quickly.
I've seen too many statutes enacted that never have regulations, and this is absurd.
There are a lot of them in DC, actually. Okay, we need to move on to our next. Any other comments from commissioners? Anything else? Okay, we've got a couple of presentations now, and we're a little bit behind schedule, but I think we can finish them. The first is Justin McCarthy, right here. He's going to talk about the Climate and Reinvestment Act, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, but I believe there's been no bill that's been introduced yet, but that Mary Chey is working on a bill, and hopefully we'll have that introduced sometime over the summer.
Yes, so again, my name is Justin McCarthy. I live in Ward 3. I'm in 3B. But to your question, there has been draft legislation. We've been holding a number of working groups with pretty much any and all stakeholders. So that means PEPCO, that means Washington Gas, that means the Public Service Commission, et cetera, et cetera. But just to back up a little bit and give sort of a 10,000-foot overview, I'm here on behalf of the Put a Price on It coalition. We're a coalition of about 90 environmental groups. We include labor unions, local businesses, et cetera, and we have been campaigning for about 2 years to essentially put a price on carbon. So sort of to establish a need for this. Like if you look at DOE's, and Tommy Wells, who is the director there, and we've spoken to him many times, if you look at their baseline figures and you compare them to what Mayor Bowser and what City Council have committed DC to in terms of climate goals by 2035 and again by 2050, we are lagging behind by almost 40%. And that's unambiguous. Those are DOE statistics. Currently we do have a renewable portfolio standard. It's good, it's not where it needs to be. And so, again, we are, in the same way we pay to have our trash taken away, we think that it's only fair and just that corporations, et cetera, should pay for their pollution, which is, in economic terms, an externality. So what we're proposing is essentially the following. So I'll take you through our proposal, then where we are in the negotiation process, and then finish with what the, so to speak, compromise has been so far, with the understanding that it is still sort of on the negotiating table. So we propose taxing carbon at $20 a ton, increasing $10 annually to 2035, where we would cap it at $150 a ton. And so essentially, if you're on the grid, if you're on the PJM grid, which is essentially the East Coast, and you draw your electricity for your home off of that grid, the mix that you're getting is going to be nuclear, gas, natural gas, wind, and solar. And we propose essentially that where you're getting that, if you're drawing that electricity from, say, a coal-fired power plant, that essentially Pepco, who is the provider, would have to pay a higher fee on that electricity. And so what we're doing essentially is we're stimulating upstream for energy producers and energy providers to more quickly transition towards renewable energy. And so, as I said, this will continue to go up over a number of years. We propose doing the same with natural gas and nuclear energy as well. And it's not just, so it's a little more robust than simply say electricity in your home. It's also gasoline, and we also, though the gasoline tax that we propose would not go into effect until after a neighboring state of Maryland or Virginia were to introduce something similar, because we understand there's significant leakage, and it would be pretty perverse, or create a pretty perverse incentive for, say, us to drive to Maryland, fill up our cars, pay less money, and come back. So with that understanding, the way it has been written and the way it is currently in the compromise proposals, it would not kick in until after a neighboring state has indeed passed similar legislation. So the sort of last of the three components, or sort of three basic components, is an excise tax on vehicles. So essentially, the more fuel efficient your car is, if you go and buy a Prius or a Nissan Leaf, basically the tax you pay on that will be, when you register it, will be significantly lower than if you were to go buy a very large SUV or a very large truck. If you are moving from out of state and you already have a car, we were conscious of the fact that particularly low-income people might not be able to afford something like that, so we've built in safeguards with income levels, et cetera, to make sure that those people would not be affected. And then, so essentially, that's sort of the 30,000-foot overview of what we're trying to do. And then, when we raise the money, we end up with $140 million in the first year, up to $596 million in 2035. And so what we're doing with the money, we want to do three things. We want to, 75% of the money, we want to rebate progressively to DC residents. So I can't guarantee that every single person in the district wouldn't pay more, but short of owning a 30-bedroom mansion and turning the lights on every night the entire time, at worst, you will not see a significant increase in your bill. That money, and especially the further down you go, certainly median income homes would see specifically about a $43 rebate per month. They would be in the black. And of course, that you would see an even larger rebate the further down the income scale that you go. 20% of the money we would be going towards green infrastructure. So like there's a green bank that's been established, but it hasn't been funded yet. And so we want to fully fund the green bank. We've also talked and continue to talk with a number of groups about where else we would spend that money on green initiatives, on greening spaces, et cetera, et cetera. And then 5% we propose giving back to small businesses as a tax incentive. Certainly we're aware that the council gives out a lot of corporate incentives already, but so these would be specifically for small district-owned, district resident-owned businesses. That was our proposal. Certainly, as I said, it's been a very iterative process, and we have spoken with pretty much anybody and everybody. DC parking, there is a working group meeting every Friday, and we facilitated by Councilmember Che, and it has a majority of legislative staff, and then, as I said, everybody from like the university consortium to the hospitals, the DC hospitals, et cetera, so it's very broad stakeholder buy-in. And essentially what we came up with when we came down the line, and it's a compromise that, quite frankly, we feel we've gone further than 50 yards, but it's one that we are willing to accept. But it's essentially, we are having the price that we're putting on carbon from $10 to $5 in the first year, and then we would be going up $5 each year annually instead of 10. We did get a lot of pushback on that from the business side, and so again, we did try to listen. we still, as a coalition, maintain that we feel like we've gone further than 50 yards. But again, and then on the electricity side, it would not be a tax per se. It's a kind of a wonky thing, but essentially what we're doing is we're going with a more robust RPS, a renewable portfolio standard. So we would be doing, currently we have 50% by 2050. It's one of the more aggressive ones in the country, but it's not the most, and we would be looking to do a 100% RPS by, date is still in negotiation, but we would like to see no later than 2038. And then what we do with the money is, under the compromise, again, from pushback from some of the larger businesses in DC, less of that money would be rebated progressively. Some of it certainly still would be at least 40%, but we would not be seeing 75%. And so essentially, the ask of the ANC and to all of you that, beyond just explaining what's happening, is we are reaching out to all the ANCs to get as much support, constituent support as possible for our proposal. And while we are realistic and we admit that we will not be getting our proposal, such as life, we feel that it's very important that we send a very strong message that we pass a resolution in support of something stronger than what we're going to get, simply because otherwise business is going to push us even further to the right. And so what I come today essentially with is an ANC resolution in support of our proposal, with the knowledge that it will not be the one that passes, but that it's important that if we were to hypothetically pass an ANC resolution for the compromise, which again we feel goes farther than 50% or further than the 50-yard line, the goalpost would move again. So essentially that's the explanation for why the ANC resolution looks slightly different than what the compromise is right now. I realize I just gave you a lot of information, so I'm welcome to questions. And I'll do my best to answer them.
First of all, commissioners?
Can you just explain, this is essentially a fee that businesses would pay for their use of the car?
Yes, so to be clear, businesses use...
I get that, but I guess what I'm asking is then, presumably that fee is then passed on to customers in some way, shape, or form, correct?
Right, so again, to be clear, everybody pays, not just we would pay in the same way corporations would pay. Anybody who uses electricity and is a consumer in the district would pay. Again, as we said in our proposal, what we wanted to do is, particularly because we prioritize making sure that residents, as opposed to businesses, were kept whole. So, as I said, under our proposal, practically nobody would actually pay more. So the price indicator, so essentially we think that it's important from like an economics standpoint that like you're not getting the rebate as part of your check, like as part of your bill from say Pepco, like it does need to be separated, just because if you're paying more and then you get say your check at the end, at the beginning of the month as opposed to the end, then there is an incentive to try and use less, whereas if you, and again, what I will say is this has been passed in over a dozen cities around the world, far more than a dozen, and it has been proven to work. Vancouver in British Columbia passed this, and something similar. The rebate is a little bit different, but they've priced carbon, and they've seen a 25% reduction in 8 years. London has something very similar. A number of cities in Canada, don't quote me on it, but I do believe Toronto has used something similar. So what I want to say is, I guess, to the point, one, residents are going to be held whole, and two, there is a lot of both theoretical economic analysis as well as real results that show that this is a policy that works.
Is your assumption then that residents are not going to be paying more money because of this? Sure. Sorry. You're saying that residents would then not be paying more for, say, their electric bill or gas once you factor in the rebate?
Right, so under our proposal, the coalition's proposal, absolutely. That is 100%, I can absolutely guarantee that. Under the compromise proposal, we're still working out the very specifics. What I can say is, if you're under the 50% median income, I can almost guarantee that you would not pay more. And above that, I do not have statistics for you at the moment. We're going to have to run all that stuff again. But what I will say is there would still be some sort of a rebate. And again, for us, when it came to making that decision, it was we felt low-income residents who are the ones who are, frankly, the ones who are being burdened by a lot of these issues are the ones that should be the ones that we're primarily focusing on holding whole. But again, under our compromise, we don't have statistics yet on that. And so I don't want to tell you something that's wrong.
Okay, yes, sir.
So I'm a strong supporter of carbon tax, that's all fine. I also do not buy gasoline in the district because it's 50 cents to $1 more in the district than if I go up the street to John. And as an ancillary issue, I would like to see the city do an economic study, competition study, of why I pay so much more in the district for gasoline than anywhere else around.
That's independent of the tax difference?
Independent of tax difference. You're not working on a level playing field. If I have a carbon tax here, even in Maryland and Virginia also have that carbon tax. I'm still going to Maryland and wasting gas and all gas.
We don't make control of that.
It's a price point issue, right? It's like my 5 cents for my plastic bags. I don't use plastic bags anymore. If you make it $1 a gallon more, I'm not buying gas in the district. Why is this market so concentrated?
Yeah,
Part of 20 years.
Yeah, a part of it may be higher cost, but I don't know where that explains
It's a
it.
distribution issue.
Yep. Okay. All right, well, thank you very much, Justin. That was very helpful. We understand the bill much better. We're probably going to consider it tonight. I think this is something we should have a resolution. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yep.
What other ANCs, particularly in Ward 3?
3C was passed.
Sorry?
3C was passed. I believe 3A was passed. And several of the others were in the process of resolutions. And there are others in Ward 1. We had a couple of passed, a couple in Ward 2, and at least one in Ward 5. And so it's where it's, again, it's in the process. So we're still in the process of doing this.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to see some of those resolutions.
Yeah.
And it's essentially the same one, but I'm happy to trade those.
Okay. Our next presentation is Carly Didden from Crown Castle.
Good evening. My name is Carly Didden. I am the Government Relations Manager with Crown Castle. We are a wireless infrastructure company, and in particular, we are getting ready to build out small cell infrastructure in the district. We have signed a contract with the district, but we have not started filing permits yet. You may say, well, what are you going to do with small cells? So small cells, if you think about it, are a miniature cellular antenna, and they can be installed on poles in the right-of-way or on existing infrastructure in the right-of-way. But the idea is you keep them out of the way, and it makes your cell phone work better. And it also will bring wireless connectivity into your home. For people such as seniors, that means that they don't have to go to the library to get connectivity. They can keep in touch with their family, they can get help when they need it. When the grandkids come visit, they can play video games if they want. But it's a way of keeping in touch. It's a way of staying safe. You can always get help. So what else do small cells do for you? In areas of congestion, such as this one, where we've heard tonight about parking concerns and the community growing older, you have more and more people in a smaller area. So that means that if you ever try to use your cell phone and you seem to have 4 bars, but you can't make a call or you can't do video or anything else, that means that there is not enough capacity in the community to just support your use of your phone. So what small cells do is they bring more capacity to the neighborhood, and they also bring it down to the street level so that when you're walking around and you're checking your phone, it's going to work. And that means that existing antennas in the community, either on rooftops or large cellular towers like you have near Tenley, can be reserved for people that are not on the street. So in multi-tenant buildings, be it residences or office buildings. So in a community, you need different types of antennas at different locations to make sure that everyone has the capacity and the connectivity that they need for today and in the future. I'm happy to answer any question.
Who pays for this?
So my customers are the wireless carriers. They sign contracts with me to build out these facilities where they have hotspots, so that's where they need extra capacity. This is actually a money-making venture for the district because I pay attachment and right-of-way fees to install my facilities.
How do you decide where they go?
So the wireless carriers tell me where they have a hotspot, so where they need more coverage, and then people from my company and from the wireless carriers, we literally walk the streets and try and find the locations that would be least obstructive and we could blend in best with the aesthetics of the community.
I've had a couple of residents in Hawthorne, my neighborhood, talk about poor cell service repeatedly to me. And I've had a couple of residents in my neighborhood in Hawthorne talk about poor cell phone service with a variety of carriers, not just one or two. So if you're looking for spots, that might be wise to walk.
I will let the carriers know.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yep. So just for clarification, this is part of a much bigger war on the rollout of 5G worldwide.
Right.
Small cell is 5G.
No. So
small cell is supplementing 4G.
So to go from 4G to 5G, it's a technological advance. So 5G rides on 4G. When we went from 3G to 4G, you wiped out the network and you rebuilt the whole thing. This is an add-on layer. And why you need small cells is because 5G technology, think of Internet of Things or smart cities, autonomous vehicles, all the wireless gadgets in your home, you know, your refrigerator that talks to you, or simply medical alerts if you've fallen and you push a button to get help. All of these things run on wireless networks. So wireless devices require data and broadband capacity, and that's what these small cells are doing. They're supplementing the existing capacity in the community so that as all of these new devices come online, you can still make a call to 911 if you need to.
So you're basically a booster service.
We're a booster service.
Anecdotally, do you have any comments on FCC's ruling on small cells and elevation of environmental?
So that is something that was vetted up one side and down the other. And so the FCC, you have a lot of environmental concerns when you build out in any community. And the FCC, through an entire rulemaking process, decided that small cells, because of their size, did not impact the environment the same way that a 100-foot tower would. So small cells, were relieved of some of those regulatory requirements, but I can assure you in the district, that the DC's version of what's called Section 106 does not include that kind of exception, and I have been in many discussions with the SHPO, and all of our facilities will comply with all of the requirements.
I was an anecdotal question. It's not really concerned in DC. It's more concerned in the West, where you have like extraordinary circumstances, like wilderness areas, like floodplains, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So there are exceptions. It's not a blanket waiver. You still have to meet the requirements.
On that same note, because they're now tying cell phones into brain cancer and stuff, do they have any studies on that?
So I can tell you that the amount of radiation that you receive from your handset, your device, when you hold it up to your phone to make a telephone call, is more than the radiation you would get from standing under my facilities. And there's medical research to support that. We also have to be in compliance with the Federal Communications, what they call RF, radio frequency exposure guidelines and requirements. So we're not exposing anyone to anything that otherwise they wouldn't be exposed to. Our facilities are well below the thresholds.
Yes, Isabel.
Yes, just to follow up on that. Is it increased risk for
So we are currently in discussions with DDOT on what these facilities are going to look like. At the moment, they've asked us not to go on Cobra-style streetlights or other municipal facilities, which was their initial approach. Right now, they're asking us to install new poles in the right-of-way within existing areas where there's other facilities in the right-of-way. So if you think of a telephone pole, that's similar to what our facilities would look like, except it's all the radios and all the antennas are enclosed within the pole.
Well, wait a minute, they want you to install additional poles?
Yeah, explain that.
Yeah.
Realizing it's DDOT, you really don't have to, but yes.
So we'll play the DDOT game. We signed an agreement with the city that spells out what we can and cannot do, within reason. And the agreement contemplates that we would attach to existing municipal structures, such as streetlights or traffic lights, whatever's in the right-of-way and owned by the district, so that we would minimize clutter. We wouldn't be adding to what was already there. Through many iterative processes, including the districts, the DDOT working with the U.S. Commission on Fine Arts and NCPC, the National Capital Planning Commission, the district has now shifted away from going on existing municipal structures to us deploying new poles in the right-of-way because we're told they don't, the collective wisdom was that they don't like the clutter on the Cobra-style streetlights.
Well, they're going to replace all the streetlights in the next few years.
So there's a separate ongoing project through OP3. So there's the small cell project that I'm working on, and then there's the LED light replacement project. And under that project, they're not replacing the whole street light, they're replacing just the light head on the luminaire.
They're also looking at smart meters and stuff to put on those poles, so why would they have another pole for you?
So part of my understanding is that they want our technology separate from theirs.
The thing about attaching, my question was how, if you did put it on an existing pole, how big is it that you're attaching?
So I provide multi-carrier solutions. So I build once and then I can serve Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, AT&T, up to all 4 carriers through one installation. It's not a single carrier solution. So what I use is a 4-foot canister antenna, think of like a toilet paper tube, would go on the top of a Cobra-style light, and then I have to install an equipment cabinet for the carrier's radios, which could either go on the pole itself or in next to the pole, and it looks like traffic control metal cabinets that you already have on the sidewalks.
So how many of these are you going to put in?
So our proposed build out in the district, and I'm one company, is approximately 750 locations. I can tell you in this particular area, because this is one of the higher elevations in the city, it's less than 10 that we're proposing to install in this particular community. And it's something that as communities grow and the population shifts, there will be more and more of these small cells around town.
You said it doesn't make sense to me, I'm sorry. Because our area is notoriously bad for cell phone reception.
I can only tell you.
Yeah, because of the dips. At one time I was a dead zone totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what the carriers have asked us to do, and we've worked with them to do, is identify certain key locations in the dips where we're going to improve the service. New poles.
You said your company. Are there other companies doing the same thing?
Yes. So the agreement is open to anyone in this particular line of business. So I can tell you that Verizon and AT&T have signed the agreement, and that there are other multi-carrier solution companies such as myself, but Extenet is one, Mobility is another, and so far they have not signed the agreement with the district.
So, if you were to guess, counting all of the companies, how many facilities would there be in DC?
There's going to be thousands of new poles.
Okay. This is all a done deal, I guess.
No.
Oh, okay.
Next to exciting.
Who is it that you go with that DDOT?
Matthew Marcoux?
Okay. Wow.
They don't like the clutter, but they want to go on other places. But they have all these lines wrapped around the pole.
does seem inconsistent that the Public Space Committee would say, no, we want more poles in public space.
I can tell you that DDOT right now is interested in hearing from stakeholders. So it is definitely. They're working on the design guidelines, so.
What do the environmental people think about this?
It's really an ancillary issue. And I'm part of planning litigation, so I appreciate
Well, you just did.
Yeah. Only to say that.
Could we maybe create every pole they put up, they have to take down cable lines, which we no longer use?
Yeah.
Now, we can use existing wood poles, but in many communities in the district, they've buried all the utilities, so we don't have wood poles that we can use. But right, so here, for us, it's actually more efficient to go on the existing infrastructure, including wood poles, that are not owned by the district. They're owned by Pepco or Verizon. And one of the requirements that we go through is called the make-ready process. In order to be able to it's called a make-ready process. So in order for us to go on the pole, we have to clean up a lot of that spaghetti that you talk about on the poles so that everything is where it belongs and nobody's causing each other interference. Thank you.
All right, the only thing left for the evening is some commission business, I think. The minutes for our May 14th meeting were published on our website and on the listserv, other places as well. Any modifications or changes? All those in favor of adopting the minutes? 5-0. We have 2 checks, is that right?
Yeah.
One is for $141.34 for Verizon for May, and the other is for $140.54 for Verizon for June. All those in favor of approving those 2 checks? 5-0. Okay. I don't have anything firmly on the agenda for July 9th, but there are several things we talked about today. Several things we talked about today that we probably will need to take up in, like perhaps the assisted living legislation, if we're going to file testimony on that, or perhaps this issue with small cells, parking task force. And we've got a bunch of things, I think, that came out of tonight's meeting that we probably do need to address. Okay. All right, thank you all for attending and staying to the end. Appreciate it.